Fort Ruger. In an effort to protect America from foreign attacks in the early 1900s, President Teddy Roosevelt convened the National Coast Defense Board to protect, you guessed it, the coasts. Over the next 10 years, various batteries were erected, including one around a massive crater in Hawaii at Waikiki's eastern coast. The broad saucer-shaped crater from about 300,000 years ago when a single explosive eruption sent ash into the air, later cooling and creating the crater. Standing in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the Hawaiian Islands were always considered a strategic location for the U.S. military to set up shop, and so they did, purchasing Diamond Head and parts of the surrounding area for $3,300, which is now about $80,000. They got to work building Fort Ruger, which included 8 different batteries, which is home to multiple systems of artillery, including rockets, mortars, and missiles. After carving a network of tunnels into the mountain, they placed cannons, observation posts, and bunkers around the top of the rim, fortifying the area with reinforced concrete and adding gun placements and mortars to protect. Other batteries were placed underground inside the crater itself. After decades of relative peace, most of the batteries no longer exist, as World War II concluded and nuclear and missile warfare became even more advanced. Fort Ruger was scaled down, with much of the land either becoming part of the Diamond Head State Monument Park or used for training and administrative purposes. You can go visit it today if you want to see a mix of natural beauty and military history.
Operation Wrath of God. In 1970, a man named Michael Harari was appointed head of a special unit within Israel's intelligence service that specialized in assassinations. He was a very high-ranking officer who's been referred to as the Zionist James Bond. In 1972, when Palestinian militants murdered 11 Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympic Games, this was the man charged with tracking down each terrorist and killing them. It was known as Operation Wrath of God, and it was a straight-up murder and revenge plot. The assassination team consisted of 15 agents separated into 5 squads. There were assassins, logistic experts, agents who specialized in tracking and following targets, and a specialist in communications. Within just 9 months, Michael's special team had killed 6 of the terrorists. Not only that, but they had tracked them through Rome, Paris, Cyprus, and Athens. These people were literally assassinating victims on foreign soil, just like you see in the James Bond movies. If you think these shadow organizations don't exist, you're dreaming. This is a real thing that actually happened. And to be honest, the only reason we know about it today is because of a mistake that was made. The big issue came in 1973 when the team was in Norway and thought they had identified a key figure in the Olympic killings. They thought it was a person living and working as an ordinary waiter. They killed him and found out he had nothing to do with any of it. The Norwegian police arrested most of the team, but Michael Harari fled back to Israel without being caught. It soon came out what was going on, and there was international outrage. The operation was canceled, that is until 1979 when it was put back on and more people linked to the Munich murders were killed. Robot Insect Army. In case you didn't think your tax dollars were going to fund worthwhile causes, check this out. The United States military is trying to create a robot insect army, at least something fairly similar. I don't know how I feel about that as a reasonable piece of research, but here's the deal. One of the most bizarre military projects going on right now involves artificial intelligence and small flying insects. We don't know the end results of the project because it's still ongoing, but we do know it began with DARPA reaching out to the scientific community to see if anyone was able to map the brain of an insect and figure out how the extremely complicated sensory and nervous systems of flying insects could translate to robotics. In other words, an army of robot insects. The idea is to create extremely tiny AI systems. Imagine a drone, except it's a fly and there are millions of them. They would operate with a type of hive mind protocol as a singular entity. We don't know how far the military has gotten with this bizarre project or what they even intend to use their robot army for. But besides, once they've assembled their army, they probably won't tell us anyway. Your tax dollars hard at work, ladies and gentlemen.
Pine Gap. You know you're a big deal when they make a Netflix show about you. That's exactly what happened to a secret military base in Australia, but the story isn't just fiction. Built to support the natural security of both Australia and the United States, Pine Gap is a remote base in the Australian outback that helps to monitor arms control and military developments of other countries. At least, that's the official story. In 2017, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation revealed what really goes on behind closed doors of the facility, including controlling satellites and monitoring communications across several continents. 2 of the secret missions run from the outpost included using spy satellites to monitor Europe, Asia, and Africa, with focus on Russia, China, the Middle East, and territories in the Atlantic Ocean. Just because the satellites orbit more than 20,000 miles about the Earth's surface doesn't make it feel any less intrusive to those nations who are being watched. The satellites have the capability to monitor cell phones, radios, and satellite uplinks that supposedly gather strategic and tactical communication related to military, scientific, political, and economic matters. But that's not the end of their surveillance. The satellites can also keep track of weapons tested in other countries and provide surveillance to U.S. forces. Using 30 radar dishes to gather their data, the facility is located about 10 minutes from the town of Alice Springs, whose 25,000-strong population are neighbors to various NSA and CIA employees, as well as employees from the U.S. Army, Navy, and Air Force. Originally built in the 1960s, the base once only monitored missile tests, but since expanding its reach, it now provides important intelligence for American operations in the battlefield. Yes, that means that they play a part in conversational drone strikes that target enemy combatants, but have also resulted in the death of hundreds of civilians.
The mustard gas program. In 1943, during the height of World War II, somebody carved their name into the rock outside the Glenbrook Railway Tunnel in Australia under strange circumstances. 80 years later, his name is still there, serving as a horrifying reminder of a secret military operation in Australia involving deadly mustard gas. The currently unused railway tunnel was once one of 14 storage facilities in Australia used to hold poisonous mustard gas during the Second World War, even though it was banned worldwide after World War I because of its devastating effects. It was one of the reasons that the Geneva Protocol in 1925 prohibited using chemical warfare. But of course, there are no real rules when it comes to war. Australia was worried about Japan during World War II, especially after the Japanese invaded Singapore. With reports that they were using chemical warfare against the Chinese, the Australians needed to be prepared. So they stored huge amounts of mustard gas all around the country, just in case. It was a secret chemical warfare program that didn't come to light until much later, when some of the people involved in the project eventually disclosed what happened, though it wasn't until the contract expired. What contract is that, you ask? It was the one bounding them to secrecy for 50 years under the threat of criminal prosecution. Then in the 1990s, they were finally able to admit the dangerous secret. Military mind control. The United States military recently funded a project to create a helmet that can read minds. Oh yes, the military is diving deep into mind control. However, it's a bit different from what you might expect. The helmets are designed to allow soldiers to fly drones and to control other robots using telepathy. The idea is that once the helmet is on the soldier's head, it'll read the signals in the brain to operate the robot or whatever other piece of machine the helmet is connected to. Here's how the project got started. First, researchers in Texas are trying to make the helmet read the vision of a person and then transfer what they're seeing into the brain of a person who's visually impaired. In other words, the person wearing the helmet, whatever they're seeing, it'll be transmitted into the brain of a blind person. This is some seriously futuristic stuff. The helmet works by utilizing light and magnetic fields to interact with neurons in the brain. The ultimate goal is to have a scenario similar to the science fiction novel Ender's Game. If you've read the book or know the story, it would basically result in a single soldier controlling huge war machines while sitting in a room somewhere with a helmet on. Would you sign up to command real military equipment with your mind? It seems a little scary to me, but what do you think?
Porton Down. If you thought living near a secret spy site was uncomfortable, try living next to a research facility known for chemical warfare. Porton Down is located in the unassuming English countryside, but its 7,000 acres of beautiful countryside still can't live down the rumors of what went down there. Stories surfaced about the scientific establishment, which was built in 1916, with tales about human experiments, whisperings about volunteer military personnel being used as guinea pigs to take part in secret tests. Porton doesn't deny the fact that they not only researched but tested the effects of chemical warfare, acknowledging that they were able to develop defenses to chemical attacks. Scientists experimented with nerve gas. Between 1945 and 1989, more than 3,400 humans were exposed to nerve gas, which causes muscles to go into a state of constant spasm and results in death because the heart and rib cage are paralyzed, not allowing the lungs to empty and fill. After finding a stash of chemical weapons during World War I, Porton had begun testing the gas on human subjects to see how it affected the body. This included testing sarin on not only the body, but the mind and intellect of those exposed. Trials continued even after a young airman died from the effects of a nerve gas dripped on his arm to determine the dosage of nerve gas that would cause incapacitation or death when applied to the clothed or bare skin. Over the years, 25,000 humans have been experimented on at that site, but even as Porton seeks to come up with defensive measures against nerve agents, their past tests are something that is chilling and should not be ignored.
Project Iceworm. Project Iceworm was one of those bizarre military operations that's almost too hard to believe. The project started after World War II when the US and Russia were stuck in the icy Cold War. Speaking of icy, the United States wanted a place to hide a small collection of nuclear missiles in case they needed to drop them on the Soviets. So the US created a base in Greenland to store nukes. Their proposed facility was to have a secret network of ice tunnels with missile silos built into them, all connected by rail cars. The project was disguised as an Arctic research center so as not to arouse suspicion. The site of the project was chosen, technicians and engineers were sent to Greenland, many tunnels were dug into the snow, an underground city was built, and a small town to house 200 soldiers was erected. But the site never really turned out to be much use and was abandoned in the mid-1960s. It wasn't even known to the public until 1997 when the Danish parliament revealed the project. That was the only reason the public found out about it. Then, when the Greenland ice sheet began melting much quicker than anticipated in the 2016s, scientists started to worry that the radioactive material still stuck in the ice in Greenland could leak into the ocean. As far as anyone knows, the problem of nuclear contamination has yet to be fixed. Augmented doggy reality. Dogs having a place in the military is nothing new. However, a new project being managed by the Army Research Office is trying to create cyborg dogs. Well, at least dogs that can make use of augmented reality. On the modern battlefield, military dogs are used to search for explosive devices and to help with rescue operations. However, a human is usually needed to be present to give the dog its instructions. Scientists want to create augmented reality goggles that can be placed on a dog's head so that its handler can give it commands remotely. How does it work? The augmented reality glasses are fixed to the dog's head. Think of it like the heads-up display in a video game. The handler will be able to transmit instructions to the goggles, which the dog then sees overlapped with the real world. Think of visual cues that the dog has been trained to follow. The dog will see commands come up in the goggles, telling it where to go, what to search for, and when to return to base. I don't want to see any friendly dogs get in harm's way more than they need to, personally. Wouldn't you rather just have robots do these kinds of tasks? Or maybe people themselves? Then maybe we'd think twice before going to war in the first place.
Tonopah. You don't have to travel to the wilds of Siberia to see strange things in the sky. In southern Nevada, the Tonopah test range is reportedly home to craft that were first developed at Roswell, a high-security base. It is known for hosting a bunch of secretive projects, with one particular night in December 2019 being strangely active. Satellite imagery of the base showed a row of hangars with seemingly identical craft parked inside, not unlikely considering the base tests various aircraft fleets. But no other images have the same number of identical aircraft on site for the same time period. So what is it about that one day that required multiple crafts of the same type to all be in operation? The United States Air Force reportedly has unmanned combat air vehicles located there that they won't even acknowledge. So trying to find information on these classified and secretive crafts is next to impossible. Other crafts, like the F-117, is based there, but most of the fleets are only a half dozen strong, not the dozen crafts seen in these satellite images. Keeping an eye on activity at the base, it seemed that at the end of 2019, there was a lot of activity in particular hangars on site. The fact that crafts originally developed and experimented with from Roswell often make their way to Tonopah only raises more questions than answers.
The Hungarian Killer. Bela Kiss is one of the most horrific killers to ever come out of Hungary. He was also a soldier in World War I that has been the source of significant mystery. In 1914, he was 37 years old and running a successful tinsmith business. Then he was conscripted to fight in the war. In 1916, Kiss's landlord heard that he had been captured and was probably dead in Serbia. So they began preparing the house to be rented to someone else. At this point, the landlord began to get a little suspicious. There were strange metal drums inside the house. The landlord thought maybe they were used for storing oil, but the lids were soldered shut. It wasn't until the landlord punctured one of the lids and opened the drum that they realized something horrifying was going on. The drums were full of rotting human flesh. The landlord informed the police in Budapest. All the drums were opened and the bodies of young women were found, most of them strangled with rope and stuffed into the barrels naked. In the end, there were 30 dead women on the property. Bela Kiss was a serial killer. The army was notified and Kiss was detained in the hospital in Serbia. But he escaped, vanished, and was never seen again. Some believe he escaped to New York City. There were investigations to try and find the guy all the way until 1936, with rumors that Kiss was working as a janitor. However, he's never been found and is definitely dead by now. The US Camel Corps. Way back in the 1830s, the expansion into the American West was difficult and dangerous. Moving from east to west involved inhospitable terrain, a bleak climate, and nearly impossible routes through desert, mountain, and river. To allow the Army easier passage into the West, Lieutenant George H. Crossman had the bizarre idea in 1836 to establish a Camel Corps, one of the weirdest experiments in the history of the U.S. Army. It wouldn't be until 1855 that Congress finally agreed to give $30,000 to purchase and import camels for military purposes. Soon after, the Navy transported a collection of camels to the United States for use as military transport. 33 camels were brought back, then months were spent acclimating the animals to their new home and teaching the locals how to properly care for them. It was when the military decided to build a road from east to west that camels came in especially handy. They could travel farther than horses and mules and could still carry about 700 pounds. They also traveled across the rough terrain more easily. They could go about 40 miles a day while only drinking water once every 2 weeks. However, by 1864, there wasn't much use for the camels anymore. There were some suggestions to use them for the postal services, but that never happened. It wasn't that the camels were useless or less useful than horses, it was just that people didn't really like them. They stank and had bad attitudes and, quite frankly, weren't as pretty as horses. In the end, the Camel Corps was scrapped and the camels were sold for $52 each. But just imagine if the camels were friendlier or had caught on with the soldiers and cowboys who lived in the Wild West. We could have a very different image of our frontier pioneer.
Oak Ridge, Tennessee. During World War II, many nations were in a race for military supremacy. Within that time, a seemingly unexpected town in East Tennessee became an integral part in the war effort. Without the rest of the country knowing, America had begun to build an atomic bomb, and Oak Ridge was the epicenter. The so-called Secret City is where the Manhattan Project took place, a decision made by the commander of the project, General Leslie Groves. East Tennessee also had good water, ample land, and cheap acreage to house the 4 production plants needed to build the weaponry. But local communities were displaced to make way for the project, with farmers and residents displaced and evicted with short notice. Protected by guarded gates and swearing workers to secrecy, work began. But surprisingly, most people in town didn't realize they were working on an atomic bomb, with officials only telling workers what they needed to know for their particular jobs. It wasn't until the attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 that the true purpose of the secret city, set on 60,000 acres between Black Oak Ridge and the Clinch River, came to light. It only took 3 years to develop the uranium that would make its way into the atomic bombs that would kill thousands in Hiroshima. Now, you can take a guided tour of the old town, with chilling photos of the original families who were evicted to make way for the site, and the plants are still there from those curious about the hidden past in small-town America that had a global impact.
Kitten spies. There were all kinds of strange operations being done by the CIA in the 60s and 70s. One of the strangest by far was when they experimented on cats. It turned out to be a pretty strange operation. After all, cats don't typically do what they're told. Still, the CIA thought that if trained properly, cats could become spies. The idea was that a cat could be wired to record conversations and it would never be busted because nobody ever thought a cat would be a spy. It didn't make sense, which is why it made so much sense to the CIA. It was known as Operation Acoustic Kitty, and it was a total failure. According to former assistant to the CIA director Victor Marchetti, the idea was to slit the cat open, stuff batteries into it, sew it back up, turn it into a living listening device, then let it go into Soviet territory to be a secret agent. Instead, Victor claims the operators made a monstrosity. It cost about $20 million, and in the end, the only thing that the CIA learned was that they couldn't train cats. North Korea killer dolphins. Evidence has recently emerged that in North Korea, the military has begun training dolphins for an unknown but probably pretty nefarious purpose. Believe it or not, this isn't the first time a nation has tried to bring dolphins into the military. The Russians did it, and so did the US Navy, but that was a long time ago. Fighting dolphins are a thing of the past, except for apparently in North Korea. They're just catching up, folks. Plus, who doesn't want to work with dolphins all day? Satellite images revealed the program in North Korea date back to at least 2015 when a dolphin enclosure was spotted near a naval base on the west coast. North Korea has yet to comment on their bizarre dolphin program, but intelligence suggests it's part of the naval modernization that's been going on under the leadership of Kim Jong-un. What exactly the North Koreans are training the dolphins to do is arguably anybody's guess, but knowing them, it's probably pretty ridiculous.
Toichia Peak Electronic Combat Range, 20 miles south of the Tonopah Test Range in Nevada. Another secret site lurks in the mountains. Known as the Toichia Peak Electronic Combat Range, it is a facility that can only be viewed from a viewpoint 18 miles to the north. With restricted airspace and a guard gate to prevent unknown visitors, the complex hosts a number of structures, including at least 2 hangars and a strange-looking installation with what appears to be a long antenna array facing east to west. The facility is believed to be involved in testing electronic combat operations that involve aircraft but strangely, there is no airstrip located within the complex. Historical images suggest the facility may have been in use as early as the 1980s, but it was much smaller then, used for training as well as to test and develop new ground and airborne systems. There are large round radar domes scattered throughout the complex. The Toichia Peak Electronic Combat Range is part of what's known as the Nellis Complex, which includes Area 51 in its over 3 million acres. There's a lot of mysterious government land just outside of Las Vegas, it seems.
The Zone of Silence. In Mexico, just over a mile from San Ignacio, there's a place known as the Silent Zone, or locally, Zona de Silencio. This place has been compared to the Bermuda Triangle. Legends say that radio waves are unable to be transmitted in the Silent Zone because of either aliens or some kind of unexplainable Earth energy. But the truth of why the Silent Zone is so silent is quite a bit stranger. There was a secret military operation in July of 1970 in which a rocket lost control, fell into Mexican airspace, and landed in the desert of Durango, very far from its intended destination. The rocket had a payload of cobalt-57, an extremely radioactive element. The rocket was eventually found and retrieved, as was the contaminated soil. But locals apparently enjoyed the attention because they perpetuated the rumors and myths until they had created a legend that to this very day brings curious tourists out to the Silent Zone in hopes of seeing aliens. There aren't any aliens, but there are the remains of a mysterious military operation gone wrong. Supersonic UFOs. Up until recently, UFOs have been strictly myths, along the same lines as the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot. But after the US government declassified some documents, the public got their first look at something called Project 1794, when the Army tried to make their very own flying saucer. The government decided enough time had passed and released the actual schematics for a flying device that was part of an operation in the 1950s to make a sophisticated military vehicle. So what happened to the UFO? It was to be built by a Canadian company on Canadian soil, though the US was heavily involved. The saucer was to take off vertically, reach a ceiling of over 100,000 feet in the air, and reach speeds of Mach 4. It would have been an incredible device. But unfortunately, UFOs aren't really that practical. The government wasted about $26 million in today's currency on the project, only to have the UFO get about 5 feet, 1.5 meters off the ground. The plug was pulled in 1960 and the information was buried. Again, your tax dollars hard at work.
China's underwater submarine base. Not all secret military bases are above ground. Take these photos of what appears to be a Chinese submarine using a base located underwater, spotted in the South China Sea on Hainan Island. The satellite images were captured by an American imaging company who spotted what they believe is a Type 93 nuclear-powered attack submarine entering a tunnel. U.S. military experts often sent out jets to gather intelligence, and in May of 2020, they did just that, hoping to get a better look at the submarine's combat readiness. But because China usually keeps their submarines in tunnels, U.S. naval intelligence wasn't able to get a clear view, making these images captured by the American company an important find for the U.S. to keep an eye on China's subs, which can be armed with both torpedoes and cruise missiles.
The Pentagon's Secret Army. The largest undercover military force in the entire world has been created by the Pentagon, and it all happened in the last 10 years or so. According to Newsweek, there are at least 60,000 people who are part of the Pentagon's Secret Army, with the majority of them working ordinary jobs with secret identities. Apparently, these secret soldiers carry out assignments both at home and internationally under civilian cover. Sometimes they hide in private businesses, some of them work in big companies, all of them are secret. A lot of them also operate in cyber warfare. The exclusive report from Newsweek was based on a long investigation spanning 2 years and looking through hundreds and even thousands of job postings and resumes. This is a vast network, a clandestine force whose members participate in everything from manufacturing to the falsification of documents. It's not exactly clear how many people participate in the secret and mysterious operations or what the end game is. But as it turns out, anyone could be a part of this hidden force, even your neighbor. Do you know anyone who you think might be a part of this hidden arm of the military? It could be someone you least expect. Zombie sharks. The US military has figured out how to create zombie sharks. At least they're trying to make zombie sharks. According to information from DARPA, they were working with Boston University on a project that involved controlling fish by electronically stimulating their brains remotely. In other words, they were turning the sharks into zombies by using a type of mind control. By stimulating the brain of a shark, particularly by stimulating their sense of smell, researchers could make the sharks move wherever they wanted them to go. This is obviously horrifying. If scientists can remotely stimulate an animal's brain to make it move in a certain direction and attack a certain target, it's only a matter of time until they figure out how to do the same thing with people, collecting an army of zombies. As for what became of the zombie sharks, the project actually went dark, and skeptics are fairly certain they must have made some kind of progress that they aren't interested in everyone else knowing about. What do you think? Are there likely to be armies of mind-controlled animals soon? What will the military do with them? Tell me your thoughts in the comments down below. Secret Laos War. From 1964 to 1973, there was a secret military operation being carried out in Laos. Laos has actually been bombed by the United States more than any other country in the world. This tiny landlocked nation was the scene of a covert attempt by the CIA to take power away from the Communist Party at the time, Pathet Lao. The group was allied with both the North Vietnamese and the Soviet Union. Even though the country was officially neutral, it was a fierce battleground during the Cold War, with American bombers dropping an estimated 2 million tons of cluster bombs. That's more than every bomb dropped in World War II by either side combined. Laos shared a border with China and Vietnam. It was a key location for keeping communism away from the rest of Southeast Asia. The bombing campaign centered on the Ho Chi Minh Trail into Vietnam. Because there was no way for the US to initiate a ground war, after all, they didn't even win the Vietnam War using ground forces, all they could do was drop as many bombs as possible to cut off communist supplies running into Vietnam, while at the same time disrupt whatever was going on in Laos. The US sent bombers from covert mission bases in Thailand. At the peak of the bombings, they were sending an entire plane load of explosives every 8 minutes, 24 hours every day for a full 9 years before they eventually stopped. Needless to say, pretty horrific. Superpowered soldiers. A new smart contact lens is being developed as part of a military project to give soldiers superpowers. The device was revealed by an engineering school in France. They showed off what they called the very first contact lens with a micro battery. As you can imagine, this caught the attention of the US military. They're interested in using the contact lens to create the visual capabilities of troops on the battlefield. As you may already know, the military has been searching for some way to create an augmented contact lens for years, a way to dramatically increase what soldiers are looking at while in the field. Imagine having binoculars in the form of contact lenses while also being able to see at night, to read information transmitted to the lenses, and much more. The possibilities are endless, though the military hasn't actually revealed the exact capability of the lenses or when they'll be available for the soldiers to use. US Dinosaur Army. Did you know that the United States military owns a shocking number of fossils? It actually began in the 1950s when the US Army Corps of Engineers built the Coralville Dam to provide flood protection for the Iowa River Valley. After they built the dam, they discovered a treasure trove of fossils dating back 375 million years on their property, revealed because of the floods before the dam was built. The flooding wiped away several feet of limestone to reveal the fossils beneath. According to Nancy Brighton, an archaeologist with the U.S. Army Corps, the military owns a collection of fossils that spans the entire paleontological record. They have everything from trilobites to dinosaurs. But what does this mean? Is the Army planning to create their very own Jurassic Park? Or what about an army of Tyrannosaurus Rexes? We don't actually have an answer for that. While it's definitely interesting to imagine what the military could do with a limitless supply of dinosaur bones, they haven't revealed any plans for creating any hybrids or bringing any creatures back to life. But that doesn't mean that it won't happen. 30 years from now, we could see soldiers riding into battle on some kind of shark-dinosaur hybrid, or cyborg mechanized T-Rexes in war zones to try to keep the peace in unstable areas. I know I wouldn't mess with something like that. Would you? What do you think the Army would do with living dinosaurs? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to hit the subscribe button for more great videos right here on American Eye.